I'm really excited to welcome our next speakers. So we've already talked about customer lifetime value with the Estée Lauder team, and we're going to hear another perspective from the Google Marketing Science team on how to use data to identify predictive behaviors. So I want to welcome Wynne and Sam from Google's Marketing Science team to take us through a use case for a global sportswear company. Wynne and Sam, welcome to the Retail Summit.
Great, thank you so much. Hi everyone, Sam and I are here today to share a case study about a propensity model that we built for a global sportswear company. And we wanted to share a little bit about this model in particular because we were able to complete multiple successful activations across different buying platforms using the insights from a single propensity model. So we had really varied activation and we were able to address multiple stages of the funnel as well. So taking a look at the agenda, I'm going to cover the business challenge and how we translated that into actual tangible model parameters. I'm going to share a little bit about the model build and performance, and then I will pass it over to Sam to take us through transfer of ownership and recap some of those activation strategies I alluded to. Finally, we will wrap up with learnings and key takeaways. Okay, so getting into it, the primary objective that we were tasked with was to drive value in the long run by identifying and reaching good customers. So what does that actually mean? After a lot of exploratory data analysis and discussions with the client, we determined that their definition of a good customer was a repeat purchaser and that the long run was defined as 12 months. So through this process, this really key process, we were able to translate this larger business objective into tangible parameters that could be actually built into a model. So once we had defined those key pieces, our objective became build a model to identify the non-purchase signals that predict a repeat purchase within the next 12 months. So along a similar line, a secondary objective of this was to actually develop better mid-funnel KPIs, because once we had identified those key non-purchase signals, we could use that to develop a high-value action-based KPI. And prior to this model, the team was working with a mid-funnel KPI of quality site visitors, which really was just defined as non-bouncers, is what you can think of it as. And I would say that it wasn't a great KPI for a few reasons. One, it required them to do manual optimizations. So they had to do analysis in GA and then go into their buying platforms and do manual optimization from there. And really the key thing is that only 1% of their quality site visitors were really turned out to be repeat purchasers. So it wasn't a really effective KPI at maximizing the goal that they actually cared about. So we set out to identify those top signals that could help us improve this KPI and make their optimizations more seamless and efficient. Okay, getting into key approach and key insights, let's discuss some of the parameters of the model. So our primary data source was the Google Analytics 360 BigQuery export. And we also incorporated some first-party data from the client's CRM. We had 2 years of historical data to work with. But that second year in that 2-year time frame was really our key buying period in which we would observe repeat purchase and label our target customers. And in terms of our population, this repeat purchaser definition was more strategic than just total customers, right? So it's just something we had to keep in mind when we were evaluating the feasibility of building this model and strategizing around methods to handle more severe data imbalances. So getting into feature engineering, we engineered features across 3 buckets of attributes: user attributes, product behavior, and custom events. So user attributes contained a lot of attributes about how the users arrived on site, how they showed up, things that we might not be able to necessarily control. So this could include things such as what region they were visiting from to what device they were browsing on. The product behaviors category contained a lot of behavioral attributes about how a user interacted with products on the site. And the custom events kind of captured everything else that was useful, a lot of key actions that a user could take on site that would have signaled intent. So right here, I will pause and note that this client we felt had fairly robust first-party data that was being brought into GA via data import that helped power a lot of those product behavioral features, as well as pretty comprehensive custom event tagging to be able to tag and measure a lot of those key events. So this is an important call out because we feel that this really helped us build a more robust and enriched model beyond what we could have built with just your standard GA implementation and baseline data. So I think it really just goes to show that investing in your technology and building in first-party data and tagging is really key. All right, model build and results. Let's start by just recapping what goes into a propensity model and what comes out. So starting with what goes in, we have all of our independent variables, our attributes, actions, and behaviors of our customers. Those were all the features that I just shared on the previous slide, right? And once the model is built, we actually get two pieces of information back. The first is the propensity score, which is the probability that that individual will complete the action of interest. So in our case, the model was scoring users on a 0 to 1 scale of how likely they were to become that repeat purchaser within the next 12 months. And the second piece of information back that we get back from the model is what we like to call propensity drivers. And propensity drivers are feedback on which of those independent variables that went in, the attributes, actions, and behaviors, were really influential at driving propensity scores. So we can actually use both of these model outputs when we're activating these types of models in media, and we have some examples of activation across both output types. All right, so once we completed our data processing and feature engineering I just took you through, we experimented with a few iterations of the model. We basically ran a side-by-side comparison of a logistic regression model and a random forest model. And in order to evaluate which model to proceed with, we judged the models off of a variety of different criteria, including a few performance metrics that are common to a logistic regression type of prediction. So the two metrics that we looked at were accuracy and recall. Accuracy is what is the percentage of total correct predictions that the model was able to achieve. And recall is the percentage of repeat purchasers correctly identified. And so for our case, for this marketing application, that's really kind of like a low-cost intervention technique to action on. We really wanted to maximize recall. We wanted to maximize the coverage of the number of potential repeat purchasers that we could identify and make sure that we were communicating with them. So once the two models were built, they actually performed fairly similarly across those two performance metrics. Both models were able to correctly identify about 2 and 3 repeat purchasers, and we had really strong accuracy across the board. So ultimately, our decision maker here was a different piece of criteria, which was interpretability. And this is important to us because a logistic regression gives you more information when you're interpreting the propensity drivers than a random forest does. And since one of our objectives was to build out that new high-value action KPI, it was really contingent upon the ability for us to evaluate the propensity drivers. So that was the ultimate deciding factor to proceed with the logistic regression model. So speaking of those propensity drivers, beyond the predictive performance, we got feedback from the model of the propensity drivers. And you can see here just kind of an illustrative sample of the top 20 positively weighted model inputs. And they're color-coded by each category. So we have user attributes in yellow, product behavior in blue, and custom events in green. So overall, some of the takeaways we had from looking at our propensity drivers was that product behaviors represented the majority of significant signals, which is great because those are things that we can action on with a KPI, as opposed to user-based attributes that we can't really control how someone shows up on site. And so what we were able to do at the end is use the non-purchase, non-user-based signals to develop our new Midfunnel KPI, which Sam will share more on shortly. So with that, I will hand it over to Sam to take us through transfer of ownership and recapping our activation strategies.
Awesome, thanks, Wynne. So as Wynne said, I'm going to talk a little bit about transfer of ownership In the context of this specific model, really what we mean by that is we're training the marketer, the brand, how to deploy and maintain this model for themselves. Our goal is not for this just to be kind of a one-off project that kind of proves the value of machine learning or advanced data usage, but we really want this to be a practice that's embedded, within the marketing teams. So the next few slides, we'll take a little peek under the hood, what's powering the model, kind of a little more detail into what Wynne just talked about, and also talk about kind of our team's process in doing these types of projects. So yeah, again, why transfer of ownership, right? I'd say, again, the short-term goal is to give the marketer the tools and the resources necessary to activate and really maintain this advanced strategy. You might imagine if you're running a test for a few months, or you have a model and you want to run it year on year, you're going to need a team that can retrain and kind of maintain that model. So while, in this case, we helped develop the initial proof of concept, our goal is for this to really have a lasting impact on the businesses that we're working with. And that's why for us, transfer of ownership is really important. And there are a lot of ways this can happen too. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, someone in-house at the brand doing that. This is a great place where we like to partner with agencies or partners like InfoTrust, really because these people are experts on, this type of work in terms of the modeling kind of data science side, but also being familiar with the data, right? I think sometimes you might have teams that have the technical skills, but maybe are not as familiar with the data, or vice versa. And so, it helps to just bring in someone who has that kind of expertise. And our longer term goal with these is to help clients build out a longer term practice, and that it's not just one model that you do and it's done, but our hope is that when we built this for this retailer, that this is going to be a catalyst for them to rethink how they use their data that's available to them, build other types of models, etc. So if we can go to the next slide, thanks. So a lot of these things I feel like can be abstract, and so I'm just going to kind of talk to some of the tools that help make this happen. GCP has a lot of different ways you can train and deploy a model. And so what I'm going to talk about here is definitely not the single way or best way to do it. This is just kind of what worked for us in this use case. And I also point out that I know looking at this might feel really overwhelming for some people. So if this is too granular for you, or you have someone else to worry about this, just kind of know that this is what's going on behind the scenes, so that we can bring that advanced intelligence and data science to your marketing. And yeah, someone is using these tools, if they're on GCP or whether another cloud service, right? They're using these types of tools. So I'll just talk through this process. GA360, right, has a native export to the BigQuery storage, and that's where a lot of this processing happens. So all that exploratory data analysis that Wynne was talking about, we're doing that pretty much entirely in BigQuery. And once we have a final data set that we know is good for the model, bringing that into Colab. And this is where really the heavy lifting in terms of the modeling happens. We're testing, in this case, we just tested random forest and logistic regression and different iterations within that. Earlier, we heard from people using TensorFlow, that can also happen in a Colab environment. I think this is a pretty common tool that our team uses and also just used throughout Google. And then when we get to the activation side, we're using PubSub and Cloud Functions. And essentially what this does is every time the data is updated, we want to trigger that model to score new users so that we can push those audiences back into GA360 and then target them on GMP. It's a serverless solution, meaning that it's really cheap. You're not paying for compute power that kind of goes on and on and on. And it really takes out a lot of work in terms of hosting a model, because this lets you send requests via an API to AI platform. And in another world, like even 5 years ago or less, you would have to do a lot more work to kind of set up your own model and host it and build a custom model on this data. And these tools are just some of them that make it really easy for this to happen. And yeah, so once those scores, as I said, are back into GA360, right, there's a match from that first party cookie to the third party, and then you can target these people across a range of buying doors within GMP. So these next two are sort of a sidebar, but I was saying before, we wanted to kind of give a little bit of insight into our thought process as we're working on these projects and building these tools. So after we had done a few of these, right, like we work with a lot of clients, and our goal is to really help them make use of the data available to them. We wanted to figure out how we can scale this work and really make it more accessible to teams that are newer to this. As I said before, right, you might have analytics or data science professionals, but they don't really have the familiarity, maybe the marketing data and the data that's coming out of, say, Google Analytics or Campaign Manager. And on the flip side, right, you might have marketing professionals who are new to data science. They're really familiar with the data, but they don't really know how to build. And if they can build a model, they might not be sure how to interpret it and make use of those propensity drivers that Wynne was talking about. And so we built some of these things kind of with these groups in mind as a good starting point if you want to get your feet wet in advanced analytics or data science projects, really as an example for what can be done, and kind of as a starter with predictive analytics or propensity modeling specifically in mind. I also want to note, I think it was really interesting because I feel like throughout the summit, we've kind of heard of building out analytics teams and how to kind of what skill set you might look for when you want to kind of expand your advanced analytics or data science practice. And I want to add another perspective to that is that you can challenge your own people and kind of grow your own analytics team from the talent that you already have, right? I think there's often marketing folks who want to gain a more technical skill set, or technical folks who maybe want to learn a new set of data to work with. And so our hope, and my hope really, in releasing some of these tools and what we do is that it enables people to kind of grow in their career in that way. And yeah, I think that if you look for the right people that are driven and want to learn, this is a great thing that will both add value for the business and for people's individual careers. So the tools that we're looking at here, we're trying to make them across the whole modeling process. So Projectgazer, right, specifically for that exploratory data analysis and that visualization of understanding what features would be good for a model, what maybe might not. And then you can also just use that insight for other site optimization, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We also have kind of like what we're calling a starter kit for propensity models. So it's very easy to kind of build something out of the box. Of course, you want to go deeper and add, again, to Wayne's point, that robust, detailed first-party data. But actually doing something with just kind of high-level features is very easy and can still be a really solid value add for the business. And then lastly, in that last slide, we were kind of walking through the architecture of activation. And that's where Project Modeling comes in. And it's kind of code that's packaged and ready to go so that that activation piece is really easy for you. If we go to the next slide. So this is just giving a little more detailed look at Projectgazer. Right, so all of this is open source. And essentially, again, this is using Colab. So it parameterizes, or lets you just kind of input, okay, here's the data I want to look at. It writes SQL for you, right? So it uses Python to programmatically write a SQL query to analyze the BigQuery export. Comes out in templatized dashboard in Data Studio, and then gives you insights that you can use to build rules-based segments, but also help inform your models. And I think an important thing to kind of mention here is that we're doing all these things with predictive modeling in mind, meaning that in this case, it's analyzing specifically behavior that happens prior to a conversion event. When we were building this, we wanted to make sure it was differentiated from just normal analytics you might look at in the UI or whatnot. And yeah, we think that time frame of looking ahead, or sorry, looking prior to a conversion is really valuable. Thanks. Yeah, so next I'll talk about activation, and really what this means, like putting your model to work, right? So there's insights that we'll get out of this. We kind of talked about having the ongoing development and maintenance of the model. But yeah, once this is built, that ongoing maintenance is like relatively cheap, whether it's like retraining or just kind of monitoring the model, it shouldn't be too much work. And so really, if you were a little intimidated by maybe some of the other technical things you've heard today or from the last few slides, hopefully this helps convince you that it's really worth it. So go to the next slide. So there were two main ways that we activated this model. One was through propensity scores. So right, for every user that visited the site, we would give them a score in terms of how likely they were to be a repeat purchaser. And this is, again, we're predicting whether they're going to be a repeat purchaser in the future, right? Our activation for this was using people in that top quintile, so the top 20% of those predicted users, use that as a seed list for a similar audience so that we can get better scale on that, and then activate via DV360. The second way we did in terms of this was search activation. And in this case, we use the propensity drivers to really help inform value-based bidding. We'll talk about these in more detail in the next few slides, so I'm not going to go too much deeper here. Great. So if you remember one of the first slides that Wynne talked about, right, one of the kind of main drivers for this problem was we didn't have a mid-funnel KPI that was really working for the client. So if you remember, right, if we're just looking at quality site visitors, which is kind of just people that don't bounce, it's not a really strong signal whether someone will be a repeat purchaser, which is what we've identified as those customers that are kind of higher value and what we wanted to train towards. So in order to build a better KPI, we took these non-purchase and non-user-based signals, as long as they were positively weighted and significant to the model readout, right? So this is also where kind of interpretation really matters and made a difference for us, because we didn't just want to use the model to score users. We also wanted to use the insights to inform other KPIs so that they could be used for other parts of the business. So that helped us, bring the client to this tomorrow state where they're using a blended KPI, which is a combination of the different high-value actions that we identified. And then when we take that audience of users that completed those top signals, that group is now 5% of repeat purchasers. And so now maybe those quality site visitors could be like a more upper or like upper mid-funnel. And we know that this new metric that we derived from the model is probably a better mid-funnel KPI. I know I see some questions, so I'm going to try to go through these a little faster so we have time to answer those. It's a little more into detail about the first activation strategy, right? So in the first case, we're importing scores into GA360 via data import. Again, taking those user scores and then setting up a similar audience list. Another thing that we always push with our clients is that you should always test these strategies. I think especially for marketers or brands where like this stuff is really new to them, it's good to really prove the value by having a statistically rigorous test. And also knowing like when you're doing this, there's people that we want to exclude, right? So in this case, there was a first priority list of users we wanted to exclude so that it was truly prospects or people that we didn't know if they were going to make a purchase or two purchases or not in the future. And yeah, one of the results we saw from this, it was a 75% decrease in CPA, among other metrics. But I think just one kind of indicator that yeah, this model was successful and helps kind of prove the value of it over time. So for search, right, because we're using these high value actions instead of the model score, it doesn't rely on that data import and that scoring of each individual user. Instead, what we did is we created new goals in GA360 based on those propensity drivers. Once we have those goals set up, we set up a custom formula column within SA360 to assign a dollar value to those high value actions. So instead of just having the bidder bid to maximize revenue, something like that, instead we bid to a combination of revenue and these high value actions and the associated revenue for those. And if you remember, right, we're looking to maximize revenue over a 12-month period. It's not just whether they're going to make a purchase today. And so what's nice about this is these actions are kind of indicative of that longer term increase in revenue from these audiences or from those actions. I also note here that in order to measure that, we had to capture the query string and basically get like the Gclid and the campaigns in a custom dimension. So that way we could track measurement over time in GA360 and see if we really did see an increase in revenue over time versus just that immediate purchase. And yeah, we're happy to say that in that case, we saw a 30% increase in return on ad spend, which we thought was also, really affirming of, the value of this type of work. Earlier we've kind of seen some other ways to activate, and so we just wanted to show that even though we did these two for this model, that's not the only thing you can do with the model. You can also use these model insights for contextual targeting. So maybe there's certain pages or certain behaviors that are really strong predictors of someone either being high value or knowing that they're going to be purchased later. You could use those to inform contextual targeting. Once your audiences are in Google Analytics, you can see how they index in Google Audiences. So maybe there's like an affinity segment or an in-market segment that you didn't realize is actually has a high overlap with the customers that you want to target, and so that might be another way to increase your mid-funnel spend and really grow your reach. And then of course you can just use this to optimize remarketing, right? I think a lot of brands have pretty robust remarketing segments and logic, but if you want to layer on that machine learning on top of that, this is a great way to do that. And I'll wrap up with best practices and some learnings from this, and then hopefully we can get these questions real quick. Cool. So this was the first time, at least our team, we actually did that activation based on the propensity drivers. We've done audience activations, and from our experience, that just didn't really scale as well. But using those high value actions and assigning those different revenue numbers to them really helped the impact of the model scale to search. So I think that's our recommendation there. As we've heard, and maybe doesn't need to be repeated, but capturing good data definitely pays dividends in the model quality. Again, there was really robust data that we used going into this model. And we think that was kind of tantamount to success. Also, right, be flexible, right? I think Yap mentioned before, having that explorer mindset and kind of trying different things. That's something that our team definitely tries to embody and to be. And so, we just, as we learn and we try different things, we want to just keep doing that. Encourage everyone here to do that as well. I know we also kind of talked about, right, there's the future of measurement, right? Like cookies may be going away. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But either way, advanced models will really help maximize the value of your first-party data and what you're collecting. And And lastly, this can be a big change for a lot of marketers. And so I would say, think about building a practice, not just building a single model or kind of doing one thing that's this nice, big, shiny object. Whether that means, working with a partner or an agency, it means hiring up, or, having your internal team kind of homegrown. I think having a practice where you're used to, working with this data in new ways, using machine learning, using statistical methods. It's a long journey. And so kind of prepare for that, but know that, they think it's important to build a practice to have that long-term impact. Thanks for your time. Sorry, I could not go as fast as I thought. Do we want to try to do one question really quick, Wynne, or if not, thanks everyone